This session will give an overview of the concept of an account chooser. You can learn more about them at accountchooser.com. This originally came out of an effort specifically around trying to eliminate passwords. And we'll talk about that, though interestingly we found out that account choosers are a very helpful user experience even for websites that continue to authenticate users with passwords. But let's just start quickly with why are passwords bad, just to go through that. The primary reason that most websites care about is just the friction. Users hate signing in, signing up, especially on mobile devices. No one wants to go through a sign-up flow on a mobile device. And then there are some websites, sadly not as many as we would like, who worry about password security. Because the reality is people reuse the same password across many different websites. And in that case, user security is only as good as the website with the worst security where they reuse their password. So the reality is all those websites who really don't care too much about user security have become the weak link of security on the internet. And the hackers have gotten pretty sophisticated at recognizing this fact. They don't go try to directly break into accounts at a Microsoft, or Facebook, Yahoo, or Google. They'll just break into any website where people are likely to reuse their password and email address. They'll find out what your password is, lots of different ways to break in and do that, and then they'll go reuse that password email into your PayPal account, Facebook account, Google account, etc., to either grab money directly or spam your friends. And the techniques for the spam have sadly gotten pretty sophisticated. A lot of times they'll lock the person out of their account, send messages to all their friends claiming, "Oh no, I'm stuck in a hotel, I can't pay the bill, please wire me money." And a lot of the user's friends will fall for that and send money. Sadly, the hackers even go a step further. Generally speaking, when they break an account, they make a copy of the information there and delete all the information in the cloud. That way, if the user does get their account back, it no longer has their address book with all their friends, so it's very hard for them to contact their friends and say, "Please don't send money if you got one of these fake things." But there might have been a lot of other valuable information in the user's account, like all the photos of a baby from the last few years that family had had. Maybe a gaming account, that user invested a ton of time in, or a PhD thesis someone had been working on a long time, etc. So that's very frustrating. So the community had been working on trying to avoid that password reuse problem, and there's a technical aspects of that focus on the use of a technology called OAuth 2. Traditionally, there have been lots of different technologies used to get rid of passwords, but the community has come together as a whole, merged all the best practices, and come up with a primary technology, OAuth 2, to be used for identity on the web. Off the web, traditional on-premise systems, legacy protocols continue to be used, but on the internet, the OAuth 2 is the lingua franca for internet identity, and it's supporting a number of new use cases, including federated sign-on without needing a password at every website. And so if you're familiar with the term OpenID, that really focuses on login without needing multiple passwords or without reusing passwords. Well, now there's a version of OpenID called OpenID Connect that is built on top of OAuth 2, has some functional improvements, and makes a lot of people happy with characteristics in it. That's great. Now there's one protocol to achieve this, but there are just as many, if not more, questions about what should the user experience look like. How does a user sign into a website without typing a password? Because this is what we've been stuck with, right? Tons of websites out there, and this is what their login box, looks like. And many of them, to be honest, are scared of changing this because they're afraid that all their existing users who are used to logging in this way might get confused. This is about the only enhancement we've seen in the last few years. The type ahead and browser autofill, that our browser support, where it remembers the last few accounts you've used on this site. There is an approach that you may have noticed on some websites. For example, this is a screenshot of Yahoo's login page. And if you go there, yes, there's the standard option to log in with an email address password. But up there on the top, you'll notice there's also the options to sign in with two buttons, one for Facebook and one for Google. And that is done using technologies like OAuth, OpenID, etc. We refer to this as a NASCAR UI, jokingly referring to the NASCAR cars that have lots of stickers all over them, because in this case they're basically two stickers And as you can imagine, there's not room to add a lot more of them. And generally speaking, once you add 3 or 4, users get pretty visually overwhelmed. There are other problems, such as once you add a button, say for a social network that's really popular this year but not so popular in the future, how do you take it off? Because all of a sudden all those people used to clicking that button can't. Or how can you customize the list to have popular identity providers in the country where the user is, because maybe you have an international audience. So a lot of known problems with this NASCAR UI, but you'll see it on many websites like Yahoo and even Google. Google has had a sign-up technique that we've used on some services, where if you tell us you want to create a new account, we will show a bunch of stickers, NASCAR stickers, for different identity providers, and ask if you want to use one of those to set up a new account. And we've experimented and found that adding more than 3 or 4 to this list really does visually overwhelm users. So just as OAuth, and OAuth 2 in particular, was a merger of lots of best practices and acknowledgement, honestly, of things that didn't work, we took a similar approach with user experience, trying to track down all the things that did work well, all the things that didn't, and merge them together. And one of the key things that came out of that discussion was this idea of an account chooser that most people have probably seen in an operating system, like, say, Windows, where you might have configured a home computer with accounts for each person in the family, the mom, the dad, the kids, etc. However, the same approach is in other operating systems like the Mac OS and even recent operating systems like Google's Chrome OS. This user experience, as you can imagine, people like. It's a lot more friendly to click your photo than to click the button of some random company or type nasty passwords. So then the question was how to bring this account user experience to the web. Well, we looked around and found there were some websites that had actually done that. For example, Quora is a popular website who, when you log in with an account, keep it so if you come back to the site, it shows a list of the different accounts that you've used in the past to log in. Hotmail also experimented with it, though, using a plugin for IE. And this was great, and interestingly, as I mentioned earlier, found that account users actually are quite helpful on websites, even if those websites continue to authenticate users with passwords. And so we do suggest that websites, even if they're not ready to get rid of passwords, start by deploying an account chooser. But we still do want to add the concept of identity providers to this approach. And so in the next few minutes, what I'm going to do is walk through screenshots from a live demo you can actually try yourself by going to the websites listed here. And there are 2 websites. One is account-chooser.appspot.com, sort of a demo online party. But another interesting one is that Google itself has deployed an account chooser. And if you just do a Google search for account chooser experiment, you can turn it on your own computer and try this demo yourself. And let's show how this works. So for our examples, we're going to use the user Sarah. She's a Yahoo Mail user, and on her computer, not surprisingly, she's logged into her mail account. She comes across some website she's never visited before, and sort of ignore the content on the left, but maybe she decides she's going to sign in and has some content she wants to make a purchase, etc. And so, not too hard for her to realize, how to log in the site. There's that big sign-in button there. So she goes and clicks it. And in some cases, she'll see, this screen that we're going to talk about how there's a potential to even skip this. And on this screen, she does see one of those NASCAR lists, with a bunch of buttons, as well as the option to type her email. So at this point, she could either click the Yahoo button or type her Yahoo address. First-time users, it's sort of a split between which one they use. Once they encounter this experience in the future, they generally click the button of their identity provider if it exists. Now, once she does that, she then gets bounced with the protocol to Yahoo. She gives her consent to share some information with this flow. Many of us have seen this. Agrees, goes back to site. Voila, the site has her name or email or photo. In some cases, the site can just immediately create an account for her. Or, maybe it has to ask for some other information like her favorite color, etc. But she's pretty quickly logged into that site. Well, let's now say Sarah, learns about this cool website for editing her photos, and so she goes and visits the website. Voila, sees it and sees that big sign-in button. So she goes ahead and clicks it. One thing she didn't notice at this point is that word Google in the top left-hand corner. In fact, what she visited here is the Picasa photo editing service that Google acquired many years ago. And we find that many people who type Picasa Web in their browser, they come to this page and they don't notice, the signs indicating that's associated with Google. So she thinks it's a new site, clicks the sign in button, sees a similar type of page, clicks the Yahoo button again, is asked to give consent again, and come back then, voila, just like before, she's logged in the site. It knows her name, her email address, her photo. She's happy. But something interesting happened behind the scenes. This service is actually run by Google. So Google actually got the login request. And what Google noticed is it got an assertion from Yahoo for sarahcorlett@yahoo.com. And Google said, oh, well, we already have an account for that address. And you know what? If the person wanted to reset the password account, we would have sent the reset message to Yahoo. So heck, we'll trust Yahoo to assert it's a Yahoo address. Might not trust Yahoo to assert it's a Hotmail address, but we'll trust Yahoo to assert it's a Yahoo address. So Google just lets the user write into their account. Very easy, but you'll notice sort of as a side effect, the user had an existing account at Google, might have been used to log in with a password for years, very easily and without thinking about it, was able to log in using an identity provider. And if she goes over to the Google homepage, she'll also see that she is logged in there or any other Google service. Great. But let's say that same user, they go back to the first website and they click the sign in button. Now is actually where the magic happens. What they'll see is an account chooser. Hopefully looking similar to the operating system mocks we showed before. Pictures of, people, though so far she only has one. And so she comes back here, she's trying to log back into her account. Pretty obvious to her what she's supposed to do. Click her picture. And if she does, boom, she's logged into her account. Now if she goes over to the Picasa website, also has an account chooser, in this case embedded in the page. How does she log in? Well, again, pretty obvious. Clicks her picture, and boom, she's logged in. It's that simple. Now, one of the key things that the community is working on, because the account chooser is part of a working group with OpenID Foundation, is the idea of trying to avoid the page where the user has to click the buttons of an identity provider or type their email address. In particular, in the previous examples, you may have noticed that the user had to build up a list of accounts on each of the different websites she went to visit, both the Google one and the other one. What we are instead moving towards is the idea where there's a central list of accounts that's basically held by the browser. It doesn't actually require new versions of browsers, it's just taking advantage of HTML5. But there's a single list of accounts in the browser. The user only has to add an account to it once. They can now go to any website, even if it's one they've never visited before, simply click the sign in button and click their picture, nothing else. So that's obviously an extremely nice experience, especially on mobile devices. But let's talk about some other aspects of this design. Hopefully one of them that you noticed was the visual consistency of it, of the sign-in button, of the flow to add the first account, as well as the return experience of picking account. One thing in particular to notice is the button itself, with sign in, with that little keyhole icon next to it. Well, an interesting thing that has been noted over the last few years is if a website on its login box adds buttons for popular identifiers like Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, etc., users, when they see those buttons, they're actually more likely to start the sign-up process than they otherwise would because they expect a more optimized process. Now, unfortunately, in many cases, there are problems where existing users get confused because they don't know whether to click a button or type their password. But ignoring that for a moment, at least increases sign up, or the number of people who start the process. And if all we had was just a button here that said sign in, users would know that that easy experience exists. So we're trying to find a way to bring that back. And one of the ways is this idea of having a consistent visual keyhole indicator in the sign-in button that users over time could come to recognize, would indicate, oh, this is a website that cares about making it easy for me to sign in and sign up. Also, there was this page where a user could pick their identifier, add a new account. You notice this was also designed to be visually consistent across the two different sites or any other sites. Though we also said that one of our goals is just to eliminate the user or user ever see this page by having a central account chooser. But let's still assume there is a situation where a user does need to add their account. There's one very important area where the consistency is not required, and that's in what is the list of buttons on the left. Every single website gets to choose what buttons are on the left. They could have no buttons if it wanted. It could have one button, or it could even do fancy things like look at the IP address of the user, do a geo lookup on it, and maybe find out the user is coming from Russia, in which case maybe it doesn't have an AOL button, it has a mail.ru button that's really popular in that country, or if they're coming from Germany, a web.de button, etc. So this addresses one of the big problems with what we earlier called the NASCAR UI. Instead of having one static, never changeable and small list, you can actually have a dynamic list, and if the user doesn't see their identifier, the easy option for them is just to type their address. So maybe the AOL user traveling to Russia, they don't see the AOL button, but they can still type their AOL email address. Once they submit it, the site can recognize, oh, there's an identity provider for that domain, and bounce the user to it. Or it might look up in its record and said, oh, well, that address, the identifier is not AOL, but maybe some other identifier, and could bounce the user over to it. Now, that's great, but what if the user types an email address and the website says, I don't know an identity provider associated with that account or with that domain? Well, what happens in that case? Well, what the website needs to do is now check whether an existing account is already on the site for that address, and if so, what's it going to do? It's going to ask the user for a password. Now, if the user does type their password and logs in, great, same experience as before, but a key thing to notice is if that user comes back to the site and clicks sign in, they're still going to see an account user. So there is nothing specific about federated identity and identity providers for account users. A website could deploy an account user solely for users who log in with passwords like Quora has done, Hotmail did in the past, Google's experimenting with, etc. And not surprisingly, it works extremely well for users. Users really like it. It's much more friendly than typing passwords or clicking buttons of some other company. But in this case, if Frank wants to re-authenticate the site, just clicks his button, and because he doesn't have an identifier, he would be asked for his password. There's another scenario though. What if the email address that the user types doesn't match any existing account at the website, and there's no identifier known for that email address? Well, in that case, the website could just show its existing account creation form, and now ask the user to type a password, retype password, might have to send an email verification mechanism, so the old ugly way of doing it. Another option for a more sophisticated website is you could tell the users, hey, please don't use a password, please, pick an identifier, and it could, list some on the page. It's really up to the website. So the website could deploy an account user with nothing to do with identifiers, or it could mix them, or it could use an account user and require all users to have an identity provider and just completely get out of the password management business. And certainly that's what we would suggest as the end goal for most sites. What we've also found about the account user is it ends up helping with a number of other usability problems. One of them, and there are many, but I'll give an example. One is, what happens if the device is used by multiple people? A home shared PC used by a husband and wife. Frequently, the husband and wife use some of the same websites, and they're always annoyed with each other. They're logging in and out, the other person to get an account to get in their Netflix queue or their, Google account, Facebook account, etc. It's really annoying. But if the website has a list of the accounts that are commonly used, then when the user goes, to sign out, the website could just, as it does here, list that, hey, Frank, there's also this account Sarah that's frequently used. Because maybe Sarah just walked up to the computer when her husband Frank walked away, and she wants to get in the site. She could simply click the word Sarah, and then her identity provider would just log her in. More sophisticated versions of this could be deployed by websites. For example, they could, when Sarah switches her account, they could keep a cookie around in the browser saying, hey, Frank still has an active account. In case he comes back to the computer and switches back to him, they could avoid asking for his password. If you want to be even more sophisticated, the website could keep some information in the URL about which account it is, question mark equal, Fred, or, account 2, for example. And then Sarah and Fred could each have their own active window or tab, in their browser, open this account. Wouldn't even need to switch at all. So some websites, like Google support that. Uh, uh, we also talked earlier about the fact that if a user comes here, they can type their email address if they don't see their identity provider listed on the left. There's another interesting scenario here, which is if they type their email address and it's not an account that needs to be authenticated with a password. There's actually a known identity provider for this email address. It's just not listed on the left. One specific example is enterprise users. Imagine an employee of a company goes to some enterprise software as a service, website, or a website like a LinkedIn that has both employees logging in and consumer users logging in. Well, the employee might type his corporate email address. The website could use some protocols to detect, oh, that enterprise runs an identity provider that's known to be good quality one. And so once the user types their email address, they could get redirected to the identity provider. Statistically, the users on their computer already logged in their corporate email account, so they would just get bounced back to the site would know who they are, they'd be logged in, boom. And if the user ever came back to the site and clicked sign in, the user wouldn't have to go through this flow again. They'd just see their picture there and click it. However, just to be a little geeky, let's imagine for a moment the user isn't logged into their identity provider at the company. What would happen in that case? Well, the user might see a screen like this one where they're bounced to identity provider. Identity provider says, oh, you're not logged in yet. Please go ahead and type your username, which he does. But maybe the identity provider says, it's not enough to log into a new device just with a password. You need to provide some second form of authentication. Maybe it's a one-time code sent to your phone, or in this case, it's answering some secret questions. Whatever it is, the user goes through that second form of authentication in addition to typing their password, and only after all of that are they actually authenticated by their identity provider. The identity provider now could do one of a few things. It might know that the user has previously consented to logging into that website. Great, well then bounce them back to it. Or maybe it's a website like an enterprise SaaS vendor where the company has a paying subscription and the company has just made the policy decision that its employees could be automatically identified to that website and the employee doesn't need to consent. In that case, fine, skip this page. But maybe the employee is logging into a website that the company doesn't have such a policy for, and so the employee does need to give consent to share their email address. No matter which of this happens, well, the user is finally bounced back to the website, they're logged in. But most importantly, if the user ever goes and visits that site again and wants to sign in, now they just simply see the button for their employee account. Maybe with their photo, maybe not, but they'd see their employee email address there. And so future logins on the site, they just simply click it. Now this is great because as you can imagine, the websites out there are not going to add a button for every enterprise, school, etc., who runs an identifier. Could never fit all of those on the screen. But here, the user is signing in simply by clicking a button. And if we use techniques like the central account chooser that the working group is developing, the user does this once, and then any website they go to, they can simply sign in with their corporate authenticated account simply by clicking a button. Now, if you're a owner of a website and you're interested in actually experimenting with or deploying an account chooser, you want to learn more, we suggest you go to the website accountchooser.com, where you can learn a lot more about it. And in particular, there's an option up there at the top for website owners to learn more, which has a bunch of different information on it. One of the things it talks about down near the bottom is the OpenID Foundation Working Group, who has developed the standards in this area and is continuing to evolve them. Something else that I would suggest that you try out is there's this option to opt into using an account chooser on Google. And so if you want to see Google's commitment to this type of approach, turn it on today. It's been available since early 2011. A lot of people experimented with it. The results have been fantastic. And if you have feedback, that link will help you send it to us. Now, you might also say, well, that's great, but I actually want to deploy this. Where do I get technology? How do I do it? Well, if you go to that account chooser, working group place, you could just download, the raw information about how we suggest building your own. There's actually even specific suggested CSS and HTML to be visually consistent. But the website also lists some tools that are already available in the market to help you deploy an account chooser. One from Google called the Google Identity Toolkit, another from Jan Rain, Login Helper, but they're starting to incorporate it with their Engage product. And there are other vendors to come that are adding it. Now, the Google Identity Toolkit is actually a free service available to any website that wants to become a relying party and wants to deploy an account chooser. What we actually decided to do here is we wanted to make sure the service was incredibly reliable. So we took the exact same service that Google itself uses to become a relying party, and we took the exact same APIs we ourselves use internally, and we just exposed them externally. And you can use those for free to talk not just to Google as an identity provider, but any of the identity providers we support. The other thing we did is we provided a JavaScript widget implementing an account user using, again, the same visual user look and feel that Google has deployed. So this service is available for free. It's actually quite easy to deploy on a website if you're using these initial identity providers. However, there is no SLA on it, and there's no dedicated support. Other vendors that are involved in the OpenID community do provide some of those things. Now, frequently when I give this presentation, people ask questions about, oh, but how does this work with stronger authentication? Or, oh, my website needs to not only get the user's email address, but know, their verified street address, etc. Well, if you want to learn about those topics and what's going on in the identity community, I suggest that you go to streetidentity.com. There was a summit held in November of 2011 where there are detailed slides and videos of those sessions online. You can learn more, join the working groups in this area. So hopefully this was interesting to you. We hope you'll experiment with deploying an account chooser on your website. Again, maybe starting without using identity providers. Just start by deploying an account chooser on your site just to improve your sign up and sign in experience. Once you've done that, adding identity providers to it, the delta for the user experience is very minimal. And if you're looking for tools to deploy it, use some of these ones like the Google Identity Toolkit or others. And if you want to experiment with it, we've given some sample sites, and you can even opt into using one on Google. And like I said, if you want to learn about strong authentication identification, please go to streetidentity.com. I hope this was helpful for you, and if you have questions, feel free to email me below.